Mama.
Who's this?
It's Wayne.
Yes, this is Mama, baby.
Mama,
Huh?
I killed Dean.
Wayne?
Ma'am?
Oh, you didn't?
Yes.
Oh, God.
Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Mary Scott walks out of her tiny brick house in Houston, Texas. She's holding a tub of birdseed. She steps off the front porch as a dozen doves appear out of the sky. They know Miss Mary and they're waiting for their feeding. She begins to sprinkle the birdseed on the ground for them, and then the smile quickly fades from her face. She sees a young man walking down the block and she stares at him. She says, "Sometimes I see someone and I think it's my son. I think he's come home." Many mothers lost their sons in Houston in the early 1970s. They disappeared and were never seen again until their bodies were found in a boat shed decomposing in the Texas heat. This is the story of the serial killer known as the Candy Man. Let's get into it. December 24th, 1939. Dean Arnold Corll is born in Fort Wayne, Indiana. His parents fought incessantly, and his father was abusive to both Dean and his brother. His mother played the role of protector, which is somewhat unusual in the case of a serial killer, but I think it's a good example of how it isn't always the mother who is abusive, but we sure do see a lot of childhood abuse in people who grow up to be very, very violent. Dean Corll was a sensitive and shy child who wasn't allowed to participate in sports or much physical activity at all because rheumatic fever had left him with a heart murmur. His parents divorced and then remarried each other and then divorced again. Dean's mother married a third time to a man named Jake West, who was a traveling clock salesman. His mother had started a small family candy company in their garage, and Dean and his brother were responsible for running the candy making machines and packaging the candy. His father and then stepfather would sell the candy on their door-to-door sales route. Dean was an average student who played in the band at school and only dated occasionally. After he graduated high school, Dean's family moved to the northern outskirts of Houston, and they opened a candy shop called Pecan Prince. Pralines are big business in Texas. I lived in Midland for about a year and then in Austin for 3 years, and there are pecan farms everywhere. If you haven't ever had a praline, they're a cluster of pecans covered in a very sweet, sugary caramel, and they're sold in every gas station, grocery store, boutique. Every place with a cash register has a box of pecan pralines for sale, and these are the candies that Dean Corll's family candy shop specialized in. The candy company grew, and Dean's mother hired a couple of teenage boys to help out. One day, one of the boys came to Dean's mother and complained that Dean was making sexual advances towards him. Dean's mother's response was to fire the teenager. Dean went into the Army, but he absolutely hated it, and after just 10 months, he applied for a hardship discharge, stating that he was needed at home to work in his family business. At this point in time, it had become obvious to those close to Dean Corll that he was gay, and back then, that was a very big problem. The candy company grew, and Dean spent most of his time working to meet the demand. By 1965, it was a very successful business, operating directly across the street from Helms Elementary School, and Dean could often be seen outside the school giving free candy to the children. Well, that sounds sweet, right? The local candy maker handing out goodies to the school kids. Yeah, you know what channel you're watching. It was not, in fact, sweet at all. Some people began calling Dean Corll the Pied Piper because a line of children would follow him around the neighborhood, but most people began calling him the Candy Man. 1967. Dean Corll befriended a 12-year-old boy named David Owen Brooks, who was in the 6th grade. David would often hang out at the back of the candy shop and even accompanied Dean and some other boys on trips Dean took to South Texas for business. You know when you're a kid and there's that guy in the neighborhood that always has a lot of children around him and you think he's like a nice person, and then later on you find out that's not what was happening? Dean Corll was that guy. This boy that Dean had befriended, David, was quiet and he wore thick glasses, and he liked Dean because Dean was an adult who didn't tease him about his appearance. Apparently, David had really been tormented by adults for his appearance. We always hear about how sensitive and offended everyone is now, and I definitely agree that sometimes it becomes too much. But I'm here to tell you, as a 51-year-old woman, adults used to be really ruthless to certain little kids. And that has changed, and I'm not going to complain about that. I can think of lots of times growing up where adults openly mocked and made fun of children for the way that they looked. So, like I said, yeah, some people take the sensitivity thing too far, but I'm certainly glad things have changed on that front. Dean would give David cash when he needed it, and David began to look at Dean as a father figure. Well, Dean was not interested in being a father figure. Before we go any further, like I have said in the past, pedophilia and homosexuality have no relation to each other. There is absolutely no correlation between the two. A pedophile is a criminal. Period. The end. It will always be that way, despite what the hysterical pearl clutchers scream about on the news. So let's just be very clear on that as we proceed. Also, I will tell you, I cannot even begin to talk about the details of Dean Corll's crimes on this platform. I can't even scratch the surface of the things that he did. In fact, I wasn't even going to cover this man because I can't talk about so much of what he did. But this case has been requested several times, and I'm all about giving you guys what you want to see. But just be aware that most of what this man did, I cannot talk about in detail. Dean was grooming David for the entirety of their friendship, and it wasn't long before Dean was giving David money and gifts in return for favors. David's parents eventually divorced and moved David away, but David would come back and visit the Houston area, and he began staying at Dean's apartment when he did, which, David later admitted he regarded it as his second home. Dean's mother divorced for the third time. She closed the candy company in 1968 and took Dean's sister and moved to Colorado. Dean took a job as an electrician at Houston Lighting and Power. Left alone in Texas with all of his family moved away, Dean Corll spiraled quickly. He began bringing boys home to his apartment, often. One time David walked in on Dean and he was assaulting two teenage boys, but Dean bribed David with gifts and money and even offered to buy him a car so he wouldn't tell anyone what he had seen. This was the beginning of Dean and David's working relationship. Dean began paying David to lure young men and boys to Dean's apartment, and many of those boys were never seen again. September 25th, 1970. 19-year-old Jeffrey Conan, a college student, vanishes while hitchhiking with another student from the University of Texas to his parents' home in Houston. Jeffrey was dropped off alone at the corner of Westheimer Road in Houston. This location was near Dean Corll's home. Jeffrey most likely came into contact with David, who lured him back to Dean's apartment. Jeffrey Conan was never seen alive again. David later on led police to his body. Jeffrey had been strangled and bound and then buried naked under a large boulder. Later that same year, David lured two 14-year-old boys away from a religious rally they were attending in Houston Heights. The boys were James Glass and Danny Yates. Dean Corll was now paying David $200 for each boy he brought to him. Now, $200 is around $1,500 now, so that was a very big sum of cash for David. I cannot tell you what Dean did to these two boys, but Dean had invented some new techniques in his trade as an electrician, and he applied those techniques using a piece of plywood with 4 holes drilled through each corner for. He also developed a fascination with these thin glass rods that he used in his electrical work. 6 weeks after this double murder, on January 31st, 1971, David and Dean lured 2 brothers, Donald and Jeffrey Waldrop, into their apartment. Those brothers met the same fate as James and Danny. Can you imagine their mother losing 2 sons to a serial killer? 2 more victims were taken by Corll separately and held for days at his apartment. Now, as if this case were not fascinating enough, we have to talk about serial killers in teams. It is so very rare to find a serial killer that works in a team, but it does happen. Henry Lee Lucas and Ottis Toole worked together. So did Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, which, that case messed me up for life. I keep thinking I'm going to cover that case, the Charles Ng and Leonard Lake case, and I'm just like, I don't even know if I can deal with it. I can still see those videotaped recordings in my mind, but if you guys want to see that case, let me know. I'll cover it. But yes, serial killers will sometimes work as a team, but it is very, very rare. This case is maybe only one of a handful where 2 serial killers work together. But this case is much more rare than that, because the duo of Dean Corll and David Brooks is about to become a trio. Between March and May of 1971, Dean Corll took 3 more victims. All were later found in the same location. David Brooks participated in all of these abductions. Randy Harvey, David Hillegeist, and Gregory Winkle all lost their lives at the hands of the Candyman. Now, you imagine that there might be some great hunt on for these boys, right? Nope, not even close. The parents of all the boys were frantic, but there was no talk of a serial killer operating in the area. The term serial killer hadn't even been coined yet. Most of the cops thought the boys had just run away. The boys' parents offered reward money. They searched the neighborhoods and the waterways and the streets, but they could not find their missing family members. Winter 1971. David Brooks lures a young man named Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. back to Dean's apartment. Dean Corll sees something in Elmer Wayne Henley, who goes by Wayne. He recognizes something in that young man that he connects with, and I find this fascinating. It's almost like killers can sense each other. Dean sees an opportunity in Wayne and decides that he isn't going to kill him. He decides instead that Wayne will make another good teammate, like David has been to him, and he makes the same offer to Wayne that he has with David. He offers Wayne $200 for each person Wayne brings to him. Dean actually told Wayne that he was involved in a white slavery ring that operated out of Dallas. That's kind of the excuse that he gave to Wayne for wanting him to find these people for him. Wayne didn't immediately take Dean up on his offer, but early in 1972, Wayne and his family fell on very hard times, and they badly needed cash. Dean had moved to 925 Schuler Street in February of 1972, and Wayne went to that neighborhood and lured a boy from the corner of 11th and Stewwood by telling the boy they were going to go smoke some pot together. When Wayne and the boy arrived at the apartment, Dean used his usual ruse on the boy. That ruse kind of went as follows. Dean Corll would pull out a pair of handcuffs, and he would try this trick on himself. He would put the handcuffs behind his back on his own wrists, and then he would free himself using a key that he had hidden in his back pocket. Dean would then ask the boys, "Do you want to try it?" That's how he kind of talked the boys into getting their hands behind their back and putting the handcuffs on. As soon as the cuffs were on, he would gag and then bind the person. This man was obviously, kind of a master manipulator. Nowadays, I think it would take a lot more to lure a teenager into a house. Maybe I'm wrong on that, I don't know. But back then, people were more naive. Like I said, the term serial killer hadn't even been coined. People were just not as savvy about their safety. And sadly, that led to a lot of young men and boys losing their lives. March 24th, 1972. The trio of killers is out together in Houston. They run across 18-year-old Frank Aguirre, who is leaving a restaurant on Yale Street where he worked at the time. Frank and Wayne knew each other. This is the point where we need to talk about the van. When my sisters and I were younger, we started using the term murder van. I don't know where it came from. We probably heard it from somebody else, but we would always joke about the guys in our little town that drove murder vans, white windowless vans that we associated with creepers, scary guys. I mean, the murder van is the thing now. I get it, but Dean Corll, the creepiest of the creepers, he had a murder van. I found conflicting information on exactly when Dean started using this van as part of his kill routine, but he had it all set up with bindings and other devices that he used. It is believed that he used the van to take hitchhikers, and he also used it to grab boys right off the street. When Wayne, David, and Dean run into Frank, this 18-year-old, Elmer tells him to come and smoke pot with them and drink with them, but Frank didn't want to get in the van. He did, however, say he would follow them to Dean's house. While in the apartment, Frank saw Dean's handcuffs. He picked them up himself and put them on, and Dean pounced on him. He threw him down on a table and finished cuffing him when his hands were behind his back. Wayne later claimed he tried to stop Dean from hurting Frank because they were friends, but Dean got his way, and later on, Wayne helped Dean bury Frank at High Island Beach. More victims were taken throughout 1972, Dean being assisted each time by either Wayne or David, or sometimes both. We know that in January of 1973, Joseph Lyles was killed just before Dean moved out of his apartment and moved to 2020 Lamar Drive in Pasadena, a suburb of Houston. That address would later become infamous. After Dean moved, he developed a hydrocele, which is an accumulation of fluid around the testicles, and it is very painful. This condition made Dean go dormant, and until his condition healed, he was not involved in any killing. But Wayne later told authorities that Dean's anger seemed to grow during this time. He doesn't know if it was the pain that he was in or the fact that he couldn't kill because of the pain, but he got kind of restless and wild. Wayne said after Dean had healed, his killings became much more brutal. There was a lot more torture involved, and that's about all I can say on that. Wayne said that he and David could always tell when Dean was getting ready to ask them to bring him a victim because he would start smoking heavily and acting restless, and even his body language got really tense. When this happened, the two were sure someone else was about to die. Wayne brought Dean classmates of his after he started attending a driving school. Homer Luis Garcia and John Sellers both lost their lives this way, and both were buried at High Island Beach. In July of 1973, David Brooks married his pregnant fiancée, and Wayne became the only one assisting Dean. In July, Wayne brought Michael Balch, Charles Cobble, and Marty Ray Jones to Dean, and then in August, Dean killed his last victim, James Stanton Dramala, a 13-year-old who was just riding his bike in Pasadena. This killing was absolutely, I almost kind of wish I didn't know, one of those things. After learning about the things that Dean Corll did, I can confidently say he is one of the most depraved of all the killers I've come across. August 8th, 1973. Dean Corll is having a house party. Wayne, who, remember, is only 17 years old at the time and has been helping Dean for years, brings one of his friends, a 19-year-old named Timothy Cordell Curley, to the party. David Brooks, who was still newlywed, did not attend the party. Wayne and Timothy arrive at Dean's house, and they were drinking and sniffing paint, which is something I guess they did a lot. They left Dean's house around midnight, telling him they'd be back soon. The two drove to Houston Heights to Wayne's kind of girlfriend's house. She was 15-year-old Rhonda Louise Williams. As Wayne and Timothy drove up to her house, they could hear shouting. Rhonda's father was in a drunken rage, something he did often, and he had beat Rhonda earlier in the evening, and she was ready to get out of there. She climbed into the back seat of Timothy Curley's Volkswagen, and the three of them returned to Dean Corll's house around 3 a.m. When Wayne and Timothy walked in with a girl, Dean was furious. He did not want any girls at his house at any time. Wayne told Dean that Rhonda had been beaten and didn't want to go home. Dean grabbed Wayne and pulled him aside, and he said, "You've ruined everything." But Wayne was able to calm Dean down, and soon Dean offered Wayne, Timothy, and Rhonda drinks and pop. After a couple more hours of partying, now in the early morning hours, the three teenagers were passed out. Wayne awoke to find himself bound with handcuffs and lying face down. Now this is Wayne, the accomplice. His mouth had been taped shut and his ankles were bound together. Timothy and Rhonda were laying beside him, and they too were bound with rope, lying face down with tape over their mouths. Timothy had been stripped naked. Dean saw that Wayne was awake. He went over to him and he removed the tape from his mouth. He told Wayne again that he was furious he had brought a girl to the house. Dean then said to Wayne, "I'm going to kill you, but first I'm going to have my fun." He then kicked Wayne repeatedly in the chest. Dean then dragged Wayne to his feet and put a gun to his stomach, and Wayne started talking fast. He told Dean that he wanted to help kill the other two. Dean and Wayne argued for a half an hour until Dean finally agreed to untie Wayne. Wayne was able to convince Dean he was on his side. The two of them then dragged Rhonda and Timothy into Dean's room and put them on these boards, these plywood boards that Dean used. Both of them were still unconscious. I couldn't find information confirming this, but I would think that Dean had to have drugged them. There's no way they're just passed out from alcohol and sleeping through this, right? I mean, they had to be drugged. Once Dean had Timothy strapped to this board and he began to do things to Timothy, Timothy woke up. Dean told Wayne he wanted him to Rhonda, and Wayne kind of went along pretending that's what he was going to do. But then Rhonda woke up. She lifted her head and said to Wayne, who was kind of her boyfriend, "Is this for real?" And Wayne answered, "Yes." Rhonda looked Wayne straight in the eye and said, "Are you going to do anything about it?" For whatever reason, this sparked what little humanity Wayne had in him, and he grabbed Dean Corll's pistol and pointed it at Dean. He shouted, "You've gone far enough, Dean." "Far enough? We're almost 30 murders into this. Wayne, that's far enough?" "Okay, Wayne." Wayne shouted at Dean, "I can't have you kill all my friends." Well, that's big of him. Dean walked right up to Wayne, holding the gun on him, and said, "Kill me, Wayne." Wayne stepped backwards a few steps as Dean continued to advance on him, shouting, "You won't do it. You won't kill me." Wayne then pulled the trigger and fired at Dean, hitting him square in the forehead. Like something out of a horror movie, the bullet did not stop this madman. Dean kept coming towards Wayne. Wayne fired again, twice, hitting Dean once in the shoulder. Dean was still not down. Dean ran from the room, hitting the wall in the hallway. Wayne followed him and fired 3 additional bullets into his back as Dean slid down the wall. Finally, Dean Corll, the Candyman, was dead, murdered by his own accomplice. Wayne untied his friends and the 3 of them talked about what they should do. Timothy finally talked Wayne into calling the police. A call comes into the Pasadena Police Department. It is answered by an operator named Velma Lines, who hears Elmer Wayne Henley say, "Y'all better come here right now. I just killed a man." Wayne gives the address to the operator, and then he, Rhonda, and Timothy sat on the porch and waited for the police to arrive. On that porch, Wayne told Timothy he had done that, meaning shot people, 4 or 5 times. So Wayne wasn't just helping bring victims to Dean, and he wasn't just helping bury the bodies. He's now saying he had killed people. The police arrived and went inside Dean's home. There they found him naked and dead, lying on his side in the hallway, riddled with bullet holes. They placed all 3 teenagers in handcuffs and read them their Miranda rights. One of the officers told Wayne he might want to be quiet, but Wayne responded, "I don't care who knows about it. I have to get it off my chest." In this kind of unbelievable piece of footage, TV camera crews caught Wayne calling his mother to tell her what had happened on a police car phone. I was unaware car phones even existed in the early 1970s, so for me, this is really incredible footage for more than one reason.
Henley called his mother and told her the story on a mobile telephone.
Who?
Mama,
Who's this?
it's Wayne.
Yes, this is Mama, baby.
Mama,
Huh?
I killed Dean.
Wayne?
Ma'am?
Wayne, you didn't.
Yes.
Oh, God. Where are you?
It's all right.
Wayne?
It's all right. It's all right.
Where are you?
I'm out of his warehouse.
Where?
Out at that warehouse he keeps.
Can I come out there?
Yes. No.
It's on the Highland Park.
She can't. No, you can't come. I'm with the police, Mama.
This next clip is really quite surreal. Wayne Henley, in the back of a police car, is interviewed by the media. Now, this would never happen now. A suspect would never be allowed to talk to the media, which is the right thing to do, the right way to do it. But it's still kind of a shame, isn't it, that we don't get these gems of historical footage anymore. I find this to be fascinating.
I woke up and he was clamping handcuffs on me. I was laying on my stomach. The other two were on their stomach and they were handcuffed and their feet were tied. I can't remember whether he tied my feet afterwards or they were tied when I woke up. I'd torture him if he'd let me go.
Was he gonna, would he want you to kill them then?
To begin with, he wanted to kill me. He was mad because I brought the chick over there. The chick wanted to run away from home and I was gonna travel with Dean. I thought it was safe. I didn't know no better.
Once Wayne Henley starts talking, he does not stop. He tells the police that about 30 men and boys have been killed and he knows where a lot of the bodies are. He tells them they can find bodies buried in a southwest Houston boat shed, at Lake Sam Rayburn, and at High Island Beach. Now, at first, the police are not sure whether they believe Wayne's outrageous claims, but Wayne keeps insisting it's all true. Wayne actually remembered a lot of the victims' names, and as police listened to him, they were horrified and then convinced that he was telling the truth because he was naming all of the boys who had been reported missing at the station. Police began going through Dean Corll's house. They found large hunting knives, lots of rolls of clear plastic, electrical motors that had been used for things, lots of handcuffs, lots of other items, and boxes of these thin glass tubes. Oh, the tubes. And they found a whole lot of rope. Then they went through the murder van. It had thick blue curtains hanging in the back to block out the only window in the van. And it was rigged with coils of rope and a beige rug that was covered in dirt stains. There was a wooden crate with air holes drilled in the sides of it and a pegboard wall where hooks and rings were attached. Police also found a second wooden crate with air holes drilled in it in Dean Corll's yard, so he had multiple crates. There were also hidden compartments in the van you could lift up. They kind of looked like a seat, but they were made to put people in. It really is a real-life horror movie. A guy driving around in a creepy van, snatching boys off the street and doing horrible things to them. It's a horror movie. It's a real-life horror movie. The police then took Wayne to the boat shed in southwest Houston. They opened the roll-up door and found an old car, a child's bicycle, water containers, sacks of lime, and large plastic bags full of boys' clothing. They began to dig. As soon as they started moving dirt, the smell became unbearable, and many of the officers were forced to leave the scene because they were sick. They first uncovered the body of a blonde teenager wrapped in plastic, and this footage is all captured on camera. I obviously can't show it here, but it is awful. They kept digging and they kept finding bodies, one after the other. Some of the victims had been shot, some had been strangled. They had all been cyanized and tortured. They dug all day and into the night. Not only is the media allowed to interview Wayne just after he killed Dean Corll, before he was even arrested or tried, they're allowed to interview the police as they dig in the boathouse. Authorities were still digging and still finding victims when David Brooks showed up at Houston Police Headquarters to turn himself in. Obviously, he knew Wayne was going to give him up. He denied being involved in the murders, but admitted to knowing about what Dean was doing. Wayne, on the other hand, gave a full written statement detailing his and David's involvement, and he confessed to having personally killed around 9 of the victims. That actually kind of surprises me. It says a lot about the relationship between Wayne and Dean. It surprised me that Dean didn't want to do the killing himself, and it also is a little bit of a window into just how tightly together they were wired, that they were both doing this. Wayne then led the police to Lake Sam Rayburn, where he said 4 victims were buried, but police could only find 2 of the shallow graves. Dean Corll's family owned a cabin at Lake Sam Rayburn, and inside that cabin, police found more plywood boards, rolls of plastic sheeting, lime, shovels, rope. There is really no telling how many victims these monsters took. As the search of the lake continued, police found an additional 9 bodies buried in the boat shed. On the same night, August 9th, David Brooks gave a full confession in which he stated, talking about the victims, "Once they were on the board, they were as good as dead. It was all over but the shouting and the crying." Ooh, that is chilling. That is really disturbing. David then agreed to accompany police, along with Wayne, to High Island Beach where they searched for more bodies. This photo was snapped of the two accomplices sitting on the beach during the search. Police began finding bodies just 2 feet under the sand. There was a family from Beaumont camping just feet from where bodies began being unearthed. As the police dug, the family pulled their children inside the pop-up camper and just kind of quietly packed up and left. Can you imagine? You're just camping at the beach and you find out you're sitting on top of the bodies that have been buried by a serial killer?
And when that boy turned himself in, I had not yet made a statement. I didn't make a statement till after he made his. So I didn't implicate him. He hung himself. That's all I want to say. I never said there were 30 people. I said 24. The name's Junior, not Elmer Wayne Henley. Well, get your pictures.
The city of Houston, and then the country, and then the world were in shock as they heard about what had been discovered. At the time, before John Wayne Gacy and the Green River Killer and Ted Bundy, this was one of the worst cases of serial murder in the United States. The body count was now at 27, and there would be one more to come, but we will most likely never know the actual number of victims taken by Dean Corll. By 1974, 21 of the victims had been identified. 2 more identities were discovered in 1983 and then in 1985. They were Richard Kepner and Willard Branch. As it stands now, only 1 victim is left unidentified. He has become known as Swimsuit Boy. These are the swim trunks he was wearing when he was found. He was also wearing these cowboy boots and this t-shirt. A forensic sketch of what the boy looked like has been done using his skull. So this is what he most likely looked like, but police still have no idea who he was. July of 1974. Wayne Henley goes to trial. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before finding him guilty of all 6 counts of murder for which he was being tried. The following day, they sentenced him to 99 years for each victim, for a total of 594 years, and he was transferred to the Huntsville unit for the rest of his life. He was retried in December of 1978 after a successful appeal, and again he was convicted and given the same sentence. David Brooks went to trial on February 27, 1975. Again, the jury deliberated only 90 minutes, and again they found David Brooks guilty for the 1973 murder of 15-year-old William Ray Lawrence. He was sentenced to life. David Brooks just died of COVID in prison on May 28, 2020. He was 65 years old. Elmer Wayne Henley still sits in a Texas prison. He comes up for parole again in 2025, but he will most likely never leave. All of his previous parole requests have been denied. In November of 2021, EquiSearch, a forensics team in Texas, conducted a dig looking for more victims on Lamar Street in Pasadena, Texas. They did not find anything, but a representative stated they will continue searching. The investigation continues, but it is unlikely we will ever know just how many lives were lost at the hands of the Candyman. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to support me. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.